In 2022, Ketanji Brown Jackson became the first Black woman to serve on the Supreme Court. In her 2 years on the bench, Jackson, who replaced retired Justice Stephen Breyer, for whom she once clerked, has emerged as a strong voice for the court's liberal minority, writing opinions on affirmative action, voting maps, abortion, and most recently, presidential immunity. On Tuesday, Justice Jackson released her memoir, Lovely One. The title comes from a translation of her West African name. Ahead of the book's release, Justice Jackson appeared on CBS Sunday Morning in her first broadcast interview since joining the High Court. The rest of the interview will stream Thursday night on Person to Person with Norah O'Donnell. Here's a preview.
You write that as a college student, you had a stubborn sense of my own value. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's a good question. I think the point that I'm trying to make in the book is that so much of success in life is believing that you can do it, believing that you have the capacity, the intelligence, the ability. And in my parents' experience, they had grown up at a time in which the larger society was not affirming of their capacity, their ability, along racial lines. I mean, this was the sort of story of segregation, the idea that there were people from certain racial groups that didn't deserve to be integrated fully into the society. And so when you come from one of those groups, you have to really focus on shoring yourself up in order to be successful.
And for more on that discussion, we're joined by Norah O'Donnell. Norah, I'm struck by that clip and your Sunday Morning interview that Ketanji Brown Jackson is motivated, and it comes from several different areas. Did that strike you, her sense of motivation?
It did, and it was instilled by her parents. They gave her this sense of perseverance. Why? Because her parents grew up in the segregated South. Her family went from slavery to the Supreme Court. As she points out in her book and in our interview with us, she was born 5 years after the Civil Rights Act. For her parents, they couldn't swim in some pools. They couldn't go to some places. So they wanted to make sure that their daughter had every dream and hope that they could never fully realize. And so you see that in her. I mean, she learned to read at the age of 2. You know, they had note cards all over her bedroom with words. You know, when her father went back to get his own law degree, she would sit across the table from him with her coloring books while he was studying to become a lawyer, and her mother was the sole breadwinner. So you get this incredible insight into how she grew up and really just how incredible her parents are.
And that line, I think it was her mother who said, if you see somebody else doing it, you can do it.
You can do it.
Sense of possibility.
Absolutely. And her mother wanted her to deliver speeches at a young age, you know, to study poetry and be able to recite it. We've heard this. A lot of other famous people have been taught this, too, as children. She then had a debate coach in high school who changed her life, Fran Berger, who instilled in her not only the ability to speak, but to use her own voice, but how to use her voice, how to present her opinions, the sort of theatrical side that is accompanying, you know, the obviously academic and intellectual capabilities that she clearly has and got her to Harvard and to Harvard Law School and to the Supreme Court.
Let me ask you about the public side. Part of it is related to that theatrical side. Justices, we see them at the State of the Union. They have to be quiet. They can't show any emotion, but they now have this role in our public life. How did she strike you in terms of, you know, she's coming out in your first broadcast interview with you. She now has a public persona, which is distinct from, with this book as well, distinct from her position as a judge on asking those questions and those rulings. How did you see those two?
Well, not only is she the first Black woman on the U.S. Supreme Court, she's also the first to come out and speak more often than any of the other justices. This was, to me, one of the most eye-opening pieces of research uncovered by the producers Julie Morse and Callie Teitelbaum was in their last term, she spoke more than, in terms of questions, than any of the other justices. She's there up at the top in terms of writing of opinions. So she hit the ground running at the Supreme Court. Now she says, well, I was a district judge, of course, another federal judge. And so she was obviously prolific in those positions as well. But she didn't come and play any deference to the other Supreme Court justices that are there and have been there for decades. She got right to work. She asks lots of questions. She's using her voice, the very same things that her parents and her teachers taught her at a very young age, and why I think she is going to become, not only just in the fact that she's a first, but a historical figure because of what she says and what she writes.
A model. Final question, Norah. What else can we expect on Person to Person?
Well, the other interesting thing is about her husband, Dr. Jackson, and who is an accomplished doctor in his own right. They met at Harvard. We went to the same classroom where they met. His admiration and respect for her comes out in tears, literally. And I joke in the interview at one point as he's going on and on about how great his wife is. I said, you know, everybody realizes they're going to want a Dr. Jackson in their life because it's really special. And obviously that is part of, I think, of what makes her so incredibly unique.